What is up, Frickos and Frickets, and welcome back to the Arctic. Now, I want everybody to close their eyes, and I want you guys to imagine the strangest or most disturbing thing you can. Alright, everybody got an answer? Good. Now, what if I were to tell you that in the year 2000, somebody thought it was a good idea to put John Travolta, resident Scientologist and Hollywood's creepy uncle, on a pair of stilts, attach dreadlocks to his head, and then put him in a movie based on a book by L. Ron Hubbard, the guy who founded Scientology? I bet your answer's changed now, hasn't it? Frickos and Frickets, I present to you Battlefield Earth, a movie so bad that the production company went bankrupt afterwards. They reported a budget of $30 million more than what they actually used and were then sued for tax fraud. And it's honestly mind-boggling to me how this production company thought they could get away with that. Because this movie, it's acting, it's screenplay, its set pieces, its cinematography are all awful. 90% of this film is shot at a Dutch angle. For those of you who don't know what a Dutch angle is, basically the camera is at a 45-degree tilt. And if I were the IRS, I would find it much harder to believe that they had an additional $30 million and the product still came out looking like it did. It'd be much easier for me to believe that the reason the film came out looking like it did was because they were $30 million shorts and could only afford to hire tripods with 2 legs and cameramen with scoliosis. Frickos and Frickets, let's start this movie. So, the first scene opens up with an expositional sentence flashed across the screen. Now, this sentence tells us 2 things. First, it tells us that it is the year 3000 and mankind is an endangered species. Second, it tells us that the script writing for this film is so lazy. Anyway, Barry Pepper rolls into his village of cave-dwelling brethren and is greeted by his girlfriend. Pepper wasn't able to find any food or water, but he was able to procure some medicine.
This is all the medicine I can find.
Barry, those are twigs. And so, when his girlfriend reveals in the next 5 seconds that his father had passed away the night before, the audience doesn't get hit with very much shock because A, the movie is 2 minutes in and it has done nothing to set up any sort of connection between us and the characters, and B, the film seems to be implying that they use sticks for medicine. Look, if you weren't gonna die before, prescription bark is definitely gonna do you in. Right, so the film, then, in its misguided attempt to rip off Star Wars, ends the scene with a wipe cut. Spoiler alert, 86, I'd say 96%. 96% of scenes in this movie end with a wipe cut. It makes me feel like this entire thing was edited in an iMovie. Right, so the wipe cut transition leads us into a cave with Barry Pepper and all of his cave-dwelling buddies. And Barry Pepper starts going on some rant about gods and demons and exploring the world beyond their cave system, all while doing some sort of interpretive dance.
Way hey, and up she rises, way hey, and up she rises, way hey, and up she rises early in the morning. Shave his belly with a rusty razor, shave his belly with a rusty razor, shave.
Is this a good movie? No. Is it exactly what John Travolta and L. Ron Hubbard's coked-up Scientologist brainchild would look like? Yeah, they nailed that one pretty well. Anyway, after his little interpretive dance soliloquy, Pepper hops on a horse and starts out exploring. A days-long journey into his exploration, the horse gets spooked by some sort of sound effect. I don't know what it was, there was no physical identification, and this leads us into 2 more people. And people is a term I use pretty generously, because for some reason, despite exhibiting perfect linguistic ability, later in the scene and throughout the entirety of the movie, they act and talk like monkeys. This guy's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if instead of flipping between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, he was flipping between the man in the yellow hat and Curious George.
You have been fortunate in the hunt.
I hope you thank the gods.
Anyway, Pepper befriends Thing 1 and Thing 2, and they camp out in some abandoned mall. But then... see, the reason he flew back actually had nothing to do with the force of the laser. What actually happened is that he was so completely and utterly disgusted by the quality of that CGI that his body actually physically propelled itself into the air in an attempt to get away from it. A few minutes of choppy slow motion, because they filmed it at the wrong frame rate, and a heaping, and I mean heaping dosage of Matrix ripping off, Barry Pepper is captured by whomever is wielding the weapon that fires shitty CGI. He gets taken to a human processing plant in, drumroll please, Denver. Denver? You're telling me that 1,000 years after the apocalypse, and 1,000 years after mankind was dethroned as the dominant species on the planet, areas of land are still defined by arbitrary city lines? There are only two people in existence who could possibly look at this film and say, huh, it's got some pretty good attention to detail. The first would be John Travolta himself, who said in an interview, Battlefield Earth is the Schindler's List of sci-fi. Travolta, what? And the second person would be Helen Keller. And I'm not even talking about Helen Keller when she was alive. I'm talking about Helen Keller now, blind, deaf, and dead. And speaking of Helen Keller, people who are blind and deaf can't do certain things intrinsically. Like a blind deaf person can't drive a car. Likewise, a person who has never seen nor heard of a gun should not be able to operate one. However, Barry Pepper, or his character's name, Johnny, I'm gonna refer to him from Johnny. I'm gonna refer to him as Johnny from now on. Johnny does not give a rat's ass about logic. He steals a gun from one of the Cyclo guards. Cyclo is the name of the alien race that took over the planet. He takes a gun from one of the Cyclo guards and hits him with a good old Skyrim Vos roll. What? And he takes off running. Now, if you were to genetically fuse a toddler with no kneecaps and a mini golf windmill, I feel like that's exactly how it would run.
No joke, sir, I swear.
If you're finding yourself unable to wrap your head around what you just saw, I will assure you that A, you're not dreaming, and B, I will go so far as to explain it myself in words. 9-foot-tall John Travolta with deadlocks, the main antagonist of this film, just gave the main protagonist a gun. He's just like, take it, here's a gun. Alright, a little multiple choice quiz is going to pop up above this finger, and I want you guys to take a few seconds to answer the following question. What do you think Johnny is going to do with the gun? Is he A, going to use it to shoot the main antagonist like a sensible person would do? Or is he B, going to fumble and bumble around with the weapon for almost a full minute before shooting nobody of any importance? If you guessed B, you'd be correct! And see, now, neither of his interactions with the gun makes sense, because the first time that he had ever seen of, heard of, much less used a gun, he operated it perfectly fine. But the second time, now that he's already seen it, he's already heard it, and he's used it, all of a sudden he's got no idea what to do with it. That's not how learning works. It would have made a little bit of sense if his first reaction was his second reaction and vice versa, but then again, nothing in this movie makes sense, so it's right on par, I suppose. And just as much as not making any sense is a staple of this film. Ending every single scene with evil laughter is just as much of a common occurrence. Either the script writing is incredibly lazy, or the entirety of the cast suffers from pseudo-bobar. One spectacular white cut later, and we find ourselves with John Travolta in a bar where apparently the only drink that is served appears to be Shrek's go-go juice. It is in this scene that we learn that John Travolta will be leaving the planet shortly. But then, in the next few minutes, John Travolta's superior teleports in from planet Cyclo, and him, along with a guy who has a scrotum for a face, informs John Travolta that he will in fact not be leaving. It's kinda hard to move a plot forward if you A, ensure that nobody will be able to get any sense out of it, and B, you're continually backtracking and undoing what you already set up. And in its continual quest to backtrack over things it's already done, John Travolta goes back to the bar, and his intent is to get wasted on more of Shrek's love gravy. And it is at this point that John Travolta delivers one of his dumbest lines in this entire movie. Which isn't really saying that much, considering that every single line that leaves this character's mouth, as well as every other character in this movie, is incredibly stupid. But this one's bad. Here's the clip.
While you were still learning how to spell your name, I was being trained to conquer galaxies.
At this point, I'm pretty sure it's just John Travolta playing John Travolta. Anywho, while John Travolta is at a bar, Johnny is behind bars. In some sort of man prison? I don't know. It's while he's in this prison that he gets into a scuffle with another one of the inmates. And when I tell you that this is the worst framed action sequence I have ever seen, I mean that it is the absolute worst! This entire scene is framed like one of those bootlegged Family Guy episodes you find on YouTube. Next, we go back to Travolta and Forrest Whitaker's character as they are laying out to Scrotum Face how they want to use man-animals for mining purposes. Scrotum Face laughs and says,
Man-animals operating machinery. Have you blown a head gasket?
Earlier in this film, and as well as later in this film, as we'll see, there are numerous ruins that indicate human civilization. If the Cyclos think that man-animals aren't capable of operating tools, how exactly did they think all that stuff got there? If they don't believe that man-animals can use tools, the only other option is that humans are sorcerers, which presents them with a much more frightening alternative. I take back what I said earlier about there only being two people in existence who could possibly look at this film and say, wow, great attention to detail. It's actually only one. It's just John Travolta. Even a blind, deaf, and dead Helen Keller would look at this film and be like, ew. And as long as we're talking about blind, deaf, and dead people, our main antagonist exhibits functionality and intelligence that closely mirrors the blind, deaf, and dead. Going behind Scrotum Face's back, he rounds up 4 man-animals, one of which is Johnny, and drops them into real-life Minecraft. And by real-life Minecraft, I mean stranding them in the middle of the Colorado mountains for 3 days. Why would he do that, you ask? Well, duh. It's to figure out what man-animals' favorite type of food is. That way he can have leverage over them and bribe them to mine. Huh? Why not just ask them what their favorite food is? That'd be preposterous! It makes much more sense to strand them in the Colorado mountains for 3 days and wait to see what they eat. Oh! See, there is a major flaw in Travolta's logic here, and I'm sure most of you guys have picked up on it too. See, I don't know how many frozen mountains you've been to, but there's not much variety of food up there, and when you've been starving for 3 days, you're pretty much going to capture and eat whatever you can. So the very notion that Travolta, upon witnessing the 4 stranded men capture and eat an uncooked rat, and then come to the conclusion that uncooked rat is the human's favorite food, cements him as the stupidest villain of all time. Like, it's not like they had a choice between the wild rat population and the wild lasagna population. Their choices were the rat population or death. And to be completely honest, I was kind of rooting for them choosing the latter. It would end this godforsaken movie a lot earlier. Anyway, after Travolta decides that uncooked rat is the human's favorite food without a shadow of a doubt, he goes to collect the 4 humans. However, what he didn't expect was that Johnny had a masterful, expert plan. See, when Travolta's airship arrives, get this, Johnny throws a stick at it. This man really thinks that twigs are the solution to everything. First he's using them for medicine, and now he's using them for anti-aircraft weaponry. Not surprisingly, his stick wasn't very effective, and Travolta rounds up the humans, except for the one he decides to drop off a cliff. And they're taken back and put to work taking down an overhang that Travolta had banged his head on previously. See, that probably wouldn't be much of a problem if they just didn't wear the goddamn stilts.